pues nada, espero aquí preguntas a montón. Venga, no me dejéis aquí. Adelante. ¿Sí? Muy bien, sí.
Bueno, lo primero, enhorabuena y felicidades por este acto. Y quería preguntar, después de la intervención de cómo está la religión en Estados Unidos y estando en el Parlamento Europeo, yo que vengo de España, no sé si hablo muy deprisa a efectos del traductor, allí en España no hay problema con la creación y la evolución porque la influencia de la Iglesia Católica pues acepta la evolución teledirigida por Dios, pero bueno, de alguna manera no hay creacionismo puro y duro. Pero, sin embargo, no tenemos ese problema, pero afortunadamente Estados Unidos, por lo menos, tiene la primera enmienda, que separa la religión y la política. Sin embargo, en España, el Estado da miles de millones de euros a la Iglesia Católica del dinero de todos los ciudadanos españoles, no solo de los creyentes, sino también de los que no son creyentes, porque la X que se pone en la casilla, luego lo que marca es el monto total que saca del dinero público. Además, la Iglesia Católica en España hay muchos impuestos que no paga, por ejemplo, el impuesto de bienes inmuebles, tiene muchísimos privilegios, en las escuelas públicas se da clase de religión, y yo aprovechando que estoy en el Parlamento Europeo, donde aquí vino el último rey absoluto de Europa, que es el Papa Francisco, el único país no democrático que hay en Europa, y que no sé qué pintaba aquí, en el Parlamento Europeo, si desde el Parlamento Europeo se podría hacer algo para unificar alguna especie de laicismo o laicidad en el conjunto de los países de la Unión.
Bueno, esa pregunta, como hablas del Parlamento Europeo, entiendo que la tendría que contestar yo, o ¿quieres hacer alguna pregunta al resto? Hombre, yo desde el Parlamento, como soy una defensora del laicismo, el secularismo, y estoy vinculada a este tipo de organizaciones, pues hago lo que puedo cuando tengo ocasión. Esto, y si quieres, pues luego podemos hablar de cosas más concretas. Si queréis contestar alguna cosa sobre la cuestión religiosa, Robin.
So you're right that the United States has the separation of church and state, and tax money is not supposed to flow to religious organizations. But in fact, millions, if not billions of dollars go to faith-based organizations in the United States. And President-elect Trump has just chosen a woman named Betsy DeVos as Education Secretary, and she's been a leading advocate for private school vouchers in the U.S. Private school vouchers would be taxpayer-funded. They would underwrite religiously oriented education for probably millions of American children. So as much as the Constitution protects against this kind of thing, the U.S. Supreme Court has allowed it. And we expect the U.S. Supreme Court under President Trump to be even more friendly to the erosion of church-state separation.
I have a question. One of the first actions that Jean-Claude Juncker's commission took when they came into power was to get rid of the chief scientific officer post that was held by Anne Glover. I was wondering, as an MEP, what did you think about that decision? Because there was quite a lot of support, opposition to Anne Glover within the Parliament itself. And I would ask you also, the panel, do you think a post like Chief Scientific Officer, and I mean, I know in the UK they have that scientific officer for every single department, and would that be something that the Parliament should be supporting so that we can receive objective, sort of rational information away from other sorts of biases? Thank you.
Tienes razón. Esto es una cosa que a mí me ha sorprendido mucho. No sé exactamente cómo sucedió toda esta historia, porque yo hace un año que estoy aquí, pero me sorprendió ver que esta figura del asesor había desaparecido. quizá por presiones de los Estados miembros que querían tener, no querían tener esta figura que les impedía hacer algunas leyes, etcétera. Pero sí que tiene mucha razón y esto sería de gran ayuda porque, por ejemplo, para los diputados, muchas veces tenemos que hacer mucho trabajo buscando información cuando un filtro fiable de este tipo nos sería de mucha utilidad y todo eso lo tenemos que ir haciendo nosotros de la forma que podemos. Así que es verdad, tiene toda la razón y yo, si puedo colaborar a que esto se vuelva a estar como antes, pues totalmente de acuerdo.
Thank you very much for your words. Actually, we're talking here with the Italian here at the conference, actually the Sicilian guy here, and I would like to pick up again from where they started with the Spain argument, because I think it's really interesting and all that we're talking about the United States of America, but at the same time, I think we should also pay some attention to the fact that some parts of Europe may not be as secular as we could think. Actually, I think it's amazing that we're here today talking about this. But for example, my origins are actually from an island in the southern periphery of Italy, where I think that arguments about secularity and all, well, they're not that much spread, and then we have a very difficult argument, especially in Italy, and I would think like in Italian politics with, the Vatican and the home of the Christian state, Vatican City. And at the same time, I would like to go beyond that, and I would like to say that, yeah, I perfectly agree with the ideals of the conference. But if I think about my people, the people in Sicily, and I think about the fact that their culture, their way of doing things is so tied to their Christian roots. I'm just thinking about the patron saint of my city of Catania and the festivity that it brings, and it connects to all the economy and the culture, and it's something so rooted for them. They even believe more in that than in going to church. How are we going to tell my people about secularity? How are we going to transform their beliefs? Because sometimes I feel like I'm trying to tell them about everything that I learn when I'm outside and away from home, but it just seems so, difficult. And the new generations are improving, but certain things are still staying behind, rooted in our culture. So, it's just a bit of a provocative questions to see what we can do as Europeans, in general. Thank you very much.
¿Puede contestar? ¿Tú quieres decir algo también?
As a scientist, my main interest is in whether religious belief is actually true, but I'm reluctantly forced to the conclusion that identity politics is very important, and the questioner, I think, raises the point that whatever people actually believe, they identify with the religion of their culture. It's become an important part of their culture. He's speaking of Sicily, one could speak of Poland, one could speak of Islam even, where I think many people brought up in Islam may not, well, whether or not they actually believe it, they feel an identity with the culture in which they were brought up. The same is probably true in Ireland, where the number of priests who are coming forward to be ordained in Ireland is reaching crisis low levels, I'm delighted to say. But nevertheless, there's a strong Catholic identity within Ireland. So I think we do have to recognize that I've probably been wrong in thinking that religion is a matter of simple factual belief. Either God exists or he doesn't, and I put forward the arguments that he doesn't. You have to recognize, as the questioner says, that to many people it's almost a matter of personal identity, let alone cultural identity. And to say to threaten somebody's religion is almost like saying you have an ugly face.
Sí, de acuerdo con matices respecto de lo que dice Dawkins en esto, ¿no? Yo creo que el respeto digamos, a la identidad, una palabra que no me acaba de gustar, pero que el respeto a la identidad pasa por no practicar ninguna forma de relativismo cultural, ¿no? Es decir, pasa por defender los valores de una manera objetiva, ¿no? Y desde luego sin poner en práctica esa suerte de paternalismo de la mala conciencia con la que a veces se revisten tantos europeos en sus relaciones con otros, más que con otras culturas, con otros esquemas de valores, ¿no? Es verdad lo que usted dice respecto de esos lugares y respecto de la precaución que hay que tener siempre a la hora de hablar del laicismo, pero desde mi punto de vista las estadísticas, y me parece que en esto son bastante ciertas, muestran un progreso, yo creo, bastante, especialmente en Europa y especialmente en la Europa del norte, del laicismo y de la no creencia. Realmente a veces, a veces que te lleva a plantear cómo, por lo menos yo a veces pienso cómo seremos capaces, cómo estamos siendo capaces de organizar un mundo sin religión, ¿no? De organizar un mundo donde esa respuesta final, muchas veces vinculada, eso sí, no con procesos ya trascendentes, sino meramente culturales, ha marcado el devenir de la humanidad, en fin, hasta ahora, ¿no?
Vamos a tomar esas 3 últimas preguntas. Miguel Ángel.
Sí. Una pregunta para el profesor Dawkins. Todos conocemos el debate que tuvo con Stephen Jay Gould acerca de NOMA, de Non-Overlapping Magistery. Quería preguntarle acerca de otro tipo de pensamiento de algunos científicos, como por ejemplo Martin Rees, el astrónomo real, que se declara un anglicano cultural. Entonces, claro, yo a veces pienso que eso puede ser algo muy británico, porque en una vieja serie suya, Sí, primer ministro, decía el protagonista algo así como que la reina es indisociable de la Iglesia de Inglaterra, pero Dios es un extraopcional.
Yes, NOMA is a phrase coined by Stephen Jay Gould for non-overlapping magisteria, where he tried to say that science has its territory, which is the way the world works, and religion has its territory, which is, I think he said, one has the rock of ages and the other has the age of rocks. And he even was allowed to concede to religion moral questions, which I think many of us thought was monstrous, and deep, ultimate questions of origins of all things, which again is something which, even if science can never answer such deep, ultimate questions, the origin of the laws of physics, for example, if science can't answer that, then religion certainly cannot either. The question of Martin Rees. Martin Rees is a very distinguished astronomer. He's the Astronomer Royal in Britain. He was until recently the director of he was the president of the Royal Society, one of Britain's most distinguished scientists. He is an atheist. He goes to chapel in Trinity College, where he was master, Trinity College, Cambridge, out of, in his phrase, loyalty to the tribe. So he feels a loyalty to his tribe, which is the Anglican tribe. I feel a certain loyalty to the Anglican tribe myself when I compare it to the competition. But I think, as a scientist, and Martin Rees is a scientist, we would both agree that there is no God, certainly no evidence for any God. We don't disagree about that. Loyalty to the tribe can take relatively trivial forms, like going to chapel if you're master of a college. That seems to me to be a reasonably courteous thing to do, a little bit like taking your shoes off when you enter a Buddhist or Muslim place of worship. I used to say grace when I was sub-warden of New College, Oxford. Benedictus benedicat, may the Blessed One be blessed. I took a leaf out of the book of the great philosopher A.J. Ayer, who also said grace in the same college. He said, "I will not utter falsehoods, but I have no objection to uttering meaningless statements." And similarly, I don't mind singing carols, I don't mind taking part in the rituals of my tribe. But it's very important to keep that quite separate from belief. It has nothing whatever to do with belief in the supernatural, in the origin of the universe, or in where we get our morals from. And I'm afraid that too many people confuse loyalty to the tribe, which seems to me to be unexceptionable, with belief in supernatural things which they privately know are false.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this great discussion. I want to thank Teresa and Richard Dawkins, as well as Robin, for the support that you've given myself and the work that I'm doing, which is with the Council of Ex-Muslims. I do want to just make a couple of points and stress something, which is I think identity politics is really poisonous. It homogenizes entire communities and societies, and it refuses to see the dissent that exists in those communities and societies, and it has meant that we no longer see human solidarity anymore, because to be in solidarity with identity politics means you usually have to be in solidarity with the imams and the Islamic organizations and the most regressive, because they're the ones who have power and they're the ones who are seen to represent that identity. And I think it's really important that we are uncompromisingly against identity politics and go back to, you know, human beings being at the center of things, citizens being at the center of things. And for us to have a more just world, it does mean that we need to have science, rationalism, and secularism. We need to be uncompromising about it. And that's one of the things I really respect about Richard Dawkins is, you know, you're sometimes accused of being aggressive, but it's the religious right that's aggressive. They're killing people. And arguing is often seen to be aggressive when it's actually what we really need. We need to be much more uncompromising. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I quite agree. And when I mentioned identity politics, I didn't mean to respect it in any sense like that. I just meant we need to be aware of its existence in order to understand what's going on. But Mariam, you are of course entirely right that especially in Britain, politicians are all too ready to go running to the imam as though he was the spokesman for the so-called community, ignoring the fact that the community is composed of a lot of individuals who may all think differently. We must beware of, as I say, going to the imam, going to the so-called community leader, who are not appointed, they're not elected, they have no authority, they have no standing to speak for the so-called community.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to add a word about identity politics, which would be a little bit teasing to Richard, because you said you're ashamed of being English because of Brexit. But why should you? You obviously were not voting for Leave. So why should you be responsible for what other people of your group do? You see, this idea that I think 40 years ago, neither of us would have said that or thought that. I think there's been a replacement, I mean, attributing to an individual the responsibility for things that are done by his group and identifying the individual with his group. It was used to be called racism, and now it's called anti-racism. And I think we have to think about that, because that's a big mistake. I'm not saying that for you especially, but in general.
Touché.
Bueno, muchas gracias por haber venido y espero veros en el próximo acto. Gracias por venir a Bruselas. Gracias.